We're live with Miller and Miller.
Hey, hey. So, tonight we got Homicide Life on the Street, Season 3, Episode 3, Extreme Unction.
Boy, that's what it's called. Great
That's
title.
what it's called, yes. And I didn't find a summary per se, but I found a sort of review of the episode, which basically serves as a summary. So I thought it was pretty well written, so I'm going to read this, and then we can talk about it. This was written by somebody who called himself David B226 Morris on TV.com. Anyways, he said, on another television show, the white glove serial murder would not be resolved until the final act. On Homicide, we learn who the killer is before the first act is over. However, nothing is ever that simple here. Pemberton is getting more and more estranged from his faith the more people turn up dead. A memorable section of this episode occurs when Frank sits inside a church after the third body has been discovered. He asks Bayless rhetorically why God allows such horrible things to happen to his children, even his own son. And when Bayless tells him that he should not question his own faith, calling it a sin, he responds by saying, "The worst sin in my book? The killer who goes unpunished." This is a man who has a very fragile faith, and it's probably about to be pushed over the edge. Then a witness comes into the squad room, Pamela Wilgus, a woman who looks a lot like a barfly than anything else, who claims she saw the body dumped and that the victim wore white cotton gloves. The interrogation scene that followed would go into homicide legend. 2 minutes in, we learn that in all probability this woman is the murderer. But before he begins digging, Wilgus appears to change personality, an act that neither Pemberton nor Giardello buy. What? Yeah. In a scene which is a mixture of seduction, antagonism, and hunt, Pemberton tries to get to the main personality, JMJ, initials which are testimony to the killer's faith, to emerge. JMJ appears to be a playful 7-year-old who imitates Frank's actions, right up until he takes out a matchbook, strikes a match, and holds it to his wrist. He tries to coax a confession out, but seemingly minutes away from getting it, her lawyer shows up and ends the interview. We will never know whether Annabella Wilgus, the real name of the killer, has multiple personalities or not. None of the detectives believe it for a minute. Certainly the impression seems like Wilgus is being a fraud. However, the way that Wilgus manages to manipulate the system, going before Matt Rhodes, who doesn't seem to object to being manipulated if it gets him an audience, and TV audience, confessing her crimes while simultaneously claiming that she was abused and wronged, makes us believe that she must have planned at least some of her defense in advance. Pemberton takes these murders very personally. Is it because of his own problems with religion, or merely the fact that this woman is going to beat the system and never pay for the crime? We'll never know for sure. What is clear is that something fundamental inside Frank is broken. Before he was merely questioning his faith, now he seems he had lost it altogether. This is made subtly very clear in another scene with Sister Magdalena when he goes to visit her outside the church instead of in it. He can no longer come face to face with God. It will take a series of extraneous events before he considers letting God back into his life. The only precious thing that he seems to be able to hold on to is the love of his wife. And I'm not going to read the end of that line because it's a spoiler for a future episode. When the murder's solved, With the murder solved, the other detectives attempt to move on with their lives. The Felton-Russert affair is resolved because of two events. Howard confronts the shift commander and tells her that she is concerned with this affair, partly because of how it will affect her work, and mostly because of the raw deal that Beth Felton seems to be getting. In a not too subtle scene, Beth Felton and Megan meet, and this seems to help her find the strength to break it off. Felton knows that he has to try and save his marriage, if only for the sake of the children. Blah, blah, blah. Another spoiler I'm not going to read. Most of the comedy in this episode comes from the continued bureaucracy that Munch, Bayless, and Lewis are going through by the waterfront. Despite Bayless's best intentions, he's becoming more and more involved in the workings of the bar, and he will begin to become more of an active partner than he wants. He does not, however, endear himself to either of his partners when he begins to berate all the hoops the owners must jump through in order to get approval, especially when he does so in front of one of the inspectors. The episode ends with a very effective scene in which Pemberton manages to extract from Wilgus why she put white cotton gloves on all of her victims. It turns out they are memories of happier times that she had with her mother involving church, and is, by the way, completely opposed to her claims of childhood abuse. Pemberton, his faith broken, looks at her and tells her that he has to believe, even if you go scot-free, that God's going to make you pay. He leaves, and the very small part of Wilgus that is genuinely remorseful with what she has done says almost inaudibly, "I'm sure that he will." The jazz backbeat makes it a fine ending to a great cycle and a new establishment of what Homicide is going to be. My score 9.25. That's what he said. So, what do you think, Ben?
I'll give it a 9.
Cool. I think that's your highest rating so far.
Yeah, especially for the interrogation scene.
Yeah, I think when I talked to you before about how, people called Andre Braugher the breakout star of the show, it was episodes like this and scenes like that really kind of let him establish, his talent, and the show also, have great scenes like that. So.
Right, I made some notes. There's some type-related things in this episode.
Yeah, right off the bat,
yes.
I had to say, Bolander could have been wearing a shirt that said SJ or Guardian in big letters.
I've got a line as well about that.
Okay, go ahead.
So just forget that Jeff just said that, audience, and I'll say here, in just the first scene, Bolander fulfills his SJ quota for the episode.
Yeah. Talking about the football team, because Baltimore, if you don't know, lost their NFL team, the Colts, when they were moved by their owner to Indianapolis, and they eventually got another NFL team. But before that happened, a Canadian Football League team actually moved to Baltimore to play there, and that's what Munch is talking about. And Bolander is lamenting how, this is a terrible thing because it's not American football, it's Canadian football, and it basically goes into a rant about how the good old days were better and all that kind of good stuff.
Now the Bills losing those Super Bowls, it still hurts. All these years later, it still hurts. Right. We've got some FI from Frank in this episode. Definitely more SFP than STP. And we actually got an example of something that's not in MBTI but is in Socionica, and that is the concept of FI break or FI polar by Munch saying that the woman was good looking, and then all I'm saying is she wouldn't be boring on a date, and that is the sort of things that ENTPs do say.
Well, it's funny you say that because I actually got a similar reaction when I said that Casey Anthony was hot, which is kind of along the same lines.
Yeah.
Now, of course, Casey Anthony didn't confess to anything, was not actually found guilty of anything, and didn't claim to be crazy. But obviously, a lot of people did come to the conclusion that she was negligent.
Definitely negligence.
So someone pointing out her attractiveness was not popular among Guardians. That don't
also, sorry, what happened was it was obvious that Geraldo Rivera was infatuated with her because he was really defending her.
Don't get me started on that guy. Guy's been a joke for as long as I've been around, and how he still gets a microphone, I still don't understand. Anyway, that's a whole digression there.
Yeah. Sorry for the interruption.
That's all right. I just happened to think of that because I actually was, one of those times I actually relate to Munch because I've been in a similar situation. I personally did not find Annabella Wilgus attractive, but anyway, go ahead.
There's a sort of thing is that ENTPs will say things that other people are thinking.
Yeah.
I put here the only poor thing was the acting of those two children, although that scene was redeemed by the fact that the actor was ballsy enough to yank him off the slide. So these days I'm not so sure about that. I mean, I wouldn't do it. Now also I put halfway through, so at the point of the interrogation scenes with Frank and the woman, I was giving it a 10, and then it just dropped only a little, then just from a 10 to a 9. And if it had just been that storyline with the woman and not the stuff with the affair, then it probably would have stayed at 10. Also, I felt that in his performance, the actor playing Bayless, he again shifted his performance into a slightly sitcom mode, whereas the other two that are funny, like Lewis is the same all the while. He doesn't need to change his performance in order to be funny.
I still think it's true to Bayless, though. The thing is when he does try to be funny, he's annoying. It's true to the character. Like, he's not a natural comedian. The character isn't. So I think the way that Kyle Siegler plays him is completely believable up to this point, that when Bayless tries to kind of be like that, he comes off as awkward and annoying. So to me, it was once again fit his character perfectly.
Oh, I'm not saying it's bad acting. I'm just saying it's a noticeable change in the performance style.
I don't know, though. I mean, I'm because I start thinking of other things.
Well, you've seen more of him than I have.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even in the episodes that we've got to so far, he has a hard time, like, I don't know, like, he gets on these sort of moral things, but it's different than the way Frank does. I guess in functional terms, it would be an extroverted feeling kind of thing. But the thing is, he's not good at, like, he's moralizing, but he's not really good at kind of picking up the vibes of the people, how they're reacting to him. So he doesn't seem to realize or doesn't care how he's coming off.
Right.
That's the way it strikes me anyway. I could be wrong, but
just with the inspector.
What's that?
With the inspector of who came in to inspect the health and safety, I suppose.
What about him?
Well, like I said, you said there that sometimes he's not aware of how people are seeing him when he's having a rant.
Yeah,
and he wasn't aware of the.
Seems to shut off. Yeah, his sort of awareness of what's going on around, because he's not always like that. I mean, sometimes he picks up things pretty well, and he's, he actually, it's not like he's always awkward with everybody all the time.
Part of it is what, I mean, as you know, is when you're writing a scene like that, and sometimes in order to get it funnier, you slightly bend the characterization. Just slightly bend the character in order to make it funnier.
For me, I'm just saying I don't think they really did, unless you say he does that as character because he's what I'm saying, like from
well, you've seen him consistently do it over 7 years, so once that's established, that becomes a consistent character trait.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking about what's happened at this point, and thinking of episodes where, he was, like, when he came in and said that the others were talking about him when they really weren't, and things like that. It's where he kind of has that.
Yeah, that's when it first started, I think.
I mean, he did some of that before that, maybe not as much, but it was when he was working on the Dina Watson case. So much of that was he was so narrowly focused on that, didn't have a whole lot of else to do. But as the series goes on, there'll be a lot more scenes to sort of establish. I guess the first one that really sort of started to establish his character beyond just what that case was Mini Splendor Thing, when he was having the conversations with Frank in the car about perversion and morality and things like that. Where you really started to get more of a window into the way he thinks, besides just trying to solve a child murder.
Yeah.
But yeah, for Pembleton, obviously this was very much a featuring episode and an arc of episodes in terms of establishing sort of the moral dilemma he's going through, in addition to trying to use his detective skills to solve the case. And that's great. Some great scenes, like with G and Russert, and when he was in the box, and like in them going back and forth on whether he was crossing the line, and when G, who's perceptive, says he's having a ball in there, like, because that's the thing is in order for Frank to do what he does, like he's even in the midst of all of this thing where he's got the moral crisis going on, he's still having fun at the same time when he's doing it. So that's the great thing. I think that's so true in the characterization of this, is that you see both sides of that. Like he's not just, if it would be boring if Frank was always like the tortured soul all the time, and it was just like that, and that was his. It would sort of become the stock character thing. But the fact that you see the other sides of him, I think is really good. So,
I mean, functionally, you're definitely seeing SE and FI.
yeah.
Oh yeah, what do you think his moral dilemma was?
Well, I mean, his whole the stuff about God and
Right.
the Catholic
His faith.
Church and yeah, all of that that's seeing him as he's trying to solve this case, because there probably, you get the feeling there have been other cases where he was able to put it down without necessarily having as much of a personal stake in it. Some of them are just, like the very first case you see him put down in the first episode, he didn't really have any personal stake in that one. He was just, this guy's stupid and I'm going to nail him. He was more thinking rather than feeling, because he defends to Bayless his methods of getting the confession. He's focused on, if this goes to trial, then the jury is going to end up, the jury will end up having a personal stake, and the killer won't get what he deserves in this case. So, I guess you could say there was still some feeling in there that he's judging, what he thinks the killer deserves, but anyway. But I guess the point is that not all of his cases have as much, anyway, of the personal attachment as he had in this one, because of his upbringing in the Catholic Church and the other things that were affecting him that way.
Yeah, that was good. We get more stuff on the background of his character. You mentioned something about his son. What's the situation with? So did his son die? Frank's son? Was something mentioned about Frank's son dying?
No.
Oh. Okay.
Are you saying you thought somebody said that in the episode, or that I said it?
Yeah, I thought you said that.
No, I'm not sure what I said that you thought was that, but.
Or maybe it was in the review. Yes, it was in the review, I think. That maybe Frank had revealed that that's one of the reasons why he'd lost his faith, that maybe have had a young son that died.
No, I didn't say that.
Oh, okay. Maybe this is another SN divide thing where I'm just imagining it. No, Ben, that's a sane loony divide.
I don't know. I'm just not sure what. Maybe if I said something that sounded like that just misheard me or something, maybe. But
all right.
What? But no, I didn't see anything about a son dying.
Okay, what else? Yes. Yeah, very good opening scene. Yeah, I like this one better than the one that was 2 episodes before, I think. Where like the opening scene was a lot better in this one, I think. It was just one, because like you said, this was the writer that actually wrote the dialogue was different from a new one that hadn't been.
Well, I don't know, because in the writing process, I don't know how much of the dialogue was written. But the credit says teleplay by D. Keith Mano.
Right.
And the story is by Tom Fontana and James Yoshimura, who are, they're the two main creative people behind Homicide through most of the show, is Fontana and Yoshimura. But Fontana's the executive producer and Yoshimura's the head writer. So.
Oh, I like the performance of the actress playing the murderer or murderess.
Yeah, I mean, she was certainly a good actor. Did a good job. It's tough when you're called upon to play the multiple personalities because the toughest thing there is making each believable as a separate character. And of course, we
Yeah.
don't even know whether or not she's legit or not, and so you have to be able to convince the audience that she could be. It can't be like obviously fake, or then you see through it too fast. But it's got to be believable enough that this could be a legitimate change that's going on within her, and that's not easy to do. It can be fun for the actor, but it's not easy.
Right. Okay. Um. hmm. Um. Yeah, at least we got the storyline resolved with Felton. I won't have to sit through more of that.
Well, at least for now. Once again, I will remind you and anyone else who would watch this that homicide, when anything is introduced, tends to come back up again in some way. So there's very few things that are just completely one-off things. I mean, there's a few things obviously in the course of not every character comes back and not every situation rears its head again. But there's a lot of things that are recurring throughout different stories and seasons. So yeah, it's not exactly a happily ever after ending with Felton, but at least in this episode, it sort of was.
Did you mention off air that there was something going on between Daniel Baldwin and the actress playing?
Oh yeah, yeah, they were living together at the time, and I think they got married later, if I remember right. I could be wrong. I didn't look up the information, but I know they were involved, and I think they had a child together. So yeah, and that was before they decided to make the storyline of them getting involved. And actually, Baldwin didn't like that. In interviews, he said he thought it was too cliched to have him be having an affair with the lieutenant or whatever. But honestly, of all the things I could accuse it of, I don't think it's cliched because there are a lot of, I would imagine when cops do end up having affairs, a lot of times it does end up with being somebody else on the job.
Oh yeah.
So
It's
that
just
seems realistic.
it's just like because it's like it's not like the most dangerous place in the world is the home. Most accidents happen in the home because people are there a lot. So
Yeah.
they're going to have affairs with
Right.
people they're getting in contact with.
So to me, it kind of made a certain amount of sense. I mean, especially because at the time, presumably, that he started the affair with her, she hadn't been promoted yet because she was just promoted. So at the time, she was another detective like him on the other shift. So
Yeah, co-equal, I suppose.
Right. So it was more like again, between people in the same job as opposed to one being a commanding officer.
Yeah, then that would be a whole different ball of wax. Right. I don't think I have anything else to say.
All right. Well, I would also give it a 9 out of 10. My own grading.
Well, sometimes an episode is like good that there's no real negatives to talk about, and whereas when something has more holes in, people tend to have a whine. Oh well, this was this. Oh, that was terrible. They should have done this instead. All that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But with this episode, it's like okay. Well, the only thing I can pick on is the poor little kids.
Yeah, well, they weren't the strongest, but it is tough to cast kid actors. You don't know exactly what you're going to get even when you try because if you're trying to find I mean, casting can be a crapshoot in general, but with kids, they don't usually have a whole lot of experience, so you kind of have to go for just somebody who seems to have some chemistry, I guess, with your other actors or
the kiddie thesps.
Yeah. So,
Right.
yeah. But yeah, I thought Daniel Baldwin did a good job of playing off of him, though. I mean, the scenes were still believable, even if
Right.
the kids' dialogue wasn't necessarily as much.
There's a chance that the one viewer that is watching at the moment, that their first name might be Juliet. Oh, we'll find out.
All right.
So,
Well, hopefully Juliet will find her Romeo.
I think she already has her Romeo.
Okay, well then all the better.
Okay, so that's bye from me.
All right. Join us next time for the next exciting episode of Homicide.